Changes in transportation. In the early 1800s, roads in the United States were usually narrow dirt paths. Moving people on roads was difficult. Moving large amounts of goods over land was almost impossible. However, people often moved goods by rivers and canals. This was usually easier and faster than moving them by land. Steamboats. Robert Fulton was an inventor in the 1800s. In 1807, he designed a steamboat by solving the problems of earlier designs. His boat, the Clermont, was able to travel both downriver and upriver against the current of the water. Soon his boat made regular trips between New York City and Albany. Fulton had found a way to make steamboats practical and successful in the United States. Canals. Canals were another important method of transportation in the first half of the 1800s. Canals are artificial waterways that connect natural bodies of water, enabling ships to move goods and people faster and less expensively. The Erie Canal, completed in 1825, was especially important because it connected the Hudson River, which emptied into the Atlantic Ocean, to Lake Erie and the rest of the Great Lakes. This made it much easier to transport goods from the Midwest to the East Coast. The Erie Canal was also opened up the possibility of new markets in the Midwest for goods manufactured on the East Coast, because manufacturers were able to ship new goods to this region. During the 1800s, the United States went from having about 100 miles of canals to more than 4,000 miles of canals. Railroads. The steam locomotive was a steam-powered engine for pulling trains. Trains were the most important form of transportation in the 1800s. The first steam engines were built in Europe in the early 1800s. Soon after that, they came to the United States. The early railroads were built around cities in the East, such as Boston, New York, and Charleston. Railroad tracks were slowly added in the West. By 1850s, cities such as Chicago, St. Louis, and Memphis were part of the railroad system. By 1869, the first transcontinental railroad was finished. Railroads moved people and goods more quickly, less expensively, and over greater distances than any other form of transportation available at the time. They connected people nationwide and allowed farmers and factory owners to ship their products all over the country. Transportation innovations also changed the way in which goods were designed and marketed. In colonial times, local markets only required certain goods, which were produced nearby. Now manufacturers could consider the needs of people living in distant parts of the country and how to market their products to these people effectively. For instance, a business that produced textiles might design one type of shirt for a person who worked on a shipyard on the East Coast and a different shirt for a person living on a farm in the Midwest. Similarly, clothes makers in Western cities could advertise fashionable whalebone corsets or imported silks caravats to their wealthy customers, even though their shops were hundreds of miles from the ocean. Negative consequences. Despite these improvements, there were negative consequences to these changes in transportation. Building the nation's transportation networks first required modifying the physical environment, such as clearing trees, damming rivers, and blasting away rock. These modifications inevitably destroyed much of the natural habitat for native plants and animals. The steam engines on trains required the burning of coal, which created smoke and air pollution. Increased levels of air pollution, especially near major centers of railroad transportation, created health hazards and difficult living conditions for the people there. In addition, the overall shift toward more manufacturing led to the contamination of rivers and other bodies of water due to the chemical waste of the manufacturing industries. The Lowell system. Not all mill owners followed this system. Francis Cabot Lowell, a businessman from New England, developed a different approach called the Lowell system. The Lowell system was based on water-powered textile mills that employed young unmarried women from local farms. The system included a loom that could both spin thread and weave cloth in the same mill. His ideas completely changed the textile industry in the Northeast. Lowell looked at the opportunity costs of running a mill and decided to construct boarding houses, providing his workers with a room and meals. With financial support from investors of the Boston Manufacturing Company, Lowell's first textile mill opened in Waltham, Massachusetts in 1814. In 1822, the company built a larger mill in a Massachusetts town later named Lowell. Visitors to Lowell were amazed by the clean factories and neatly kept boarding houses, as well as the new machinery. The young mill workers soon became known as Lowell girls. The mills paid them between $2 and $4 each week. The workers paid $1.25 for room and board. These wages were much better than those women could earn in other jobs, such as domestic work. Many young women came to Lowell from across New England. They wanted the chance to earn money instead of working on the family farm. The typical Lowell girl worked at the mills for about 4 years. Unlike other factory workers, the Lowell girls were encouraged to use their free time to take classes and form women's clubs. They even wrote their own magazine, The Lowell Offering. Mill life was hard, however. The work day was between 12 and 14 hours long, and daily life was carefully controlled. Ringing bells ordered workers to breakfast or lunch. Employees had to work harder and faster to keep up with new equipment. Cotton dust also began to cause health problems, such as chronic cough for workers. Workers organized. Industrialization in the early 1800s brought big changes to the United States. The urban population of the nation grew as young people from the country moved to the cities. They were looking for jobs in the factories. Immigrants from Northern and Western Europe also flooded the cities. They were looking for jobs and a better life. In 1800, New York City was the largest urban center in the United States. It had just over 60,000 people. By 1830, that number had leaped up to more than 300,000. New York was not the only place that was expanding. From 18 to 1840, the total population of the country increased from 2 million to 17 million. Urban growth led to overcrowded, dangerous, and unsanitary living conditions for the working class. Factory workers' wages went down as people competed for jobs. Immigrants also competed for jobs. The Panic of 1837 led to unemployment for many. Factory work required long days and unhealthy, dangerous conditions. Several early labor movements called for improving the working conditions. One movement called for limiting the workday. In some cases, workers might spend up to 12 hours on the job. In 1835, workers went on strike in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to demand a 10-hour workday. In 1847, New Hampshire enacted the first state law for the 10-hour day. Skilled workers started trade unions for protection. Sometimes union members held strikes. Men and women workers alike started to demand higher wages, and as a result, many labor unions started to emerge. As industrialization progressed during the middle of the 1800s, working conditions somewhat improved, and in some instances, wages increased. However, there were still many new challenges due to the technological innovations and continually changing patterns of migration and urban growth. Union supporters kept fighting for improved working conditions during the 1800s. Now, answer the next 15 questions in your notes section for Chapter 12, Sections 2 and 3.